Hello, and welcome to the Spoonie Authors Podcast, a podcast where we explore a different disabled authors' stories each week. I am your host, Diana Gunn, and joining us today is Sophia Beaumont. Sophia Beaumont is a knitwear designer, copy editor, sensitivity reader, and multi-genre author. She is currently gearing up to re-release her historical fiction novel, Off the Rails, under the pen name Sheena Peril. Hello, Sophia.
Hi. Slight correction. I'm not re-releasing that one. It's already out. It came
Oh,
out in October 2018. The book that I'm re-releasing in April is True Faust and the Devil's Due.
okay. I thought that for some reason, I thought that this was originally published under your usual author name and that you were republishing it under the pen name.
No.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
Well, thank you for that correction. Tell us more about Off the Rails.
Okay, so Off the Rails is a Civil War era murder mystery. It's set just after peace is declared between the Union and Confederate armies, and it follows our main character, whose name is Sophia. No, I did not name her after myself. It is actually, she's of Irish descent. Her parents immigrated from Ireland, and it's a bad anglicization of her given name, because that often happened with immigrant families is they would anglicize the names. And she went to this very fancy finishing school, and they said that she needed to be more American and less Irish, so they changed her name. But anyways, so Sophia is living in upstate New York. Her husband is a railroad baron, but they grew up poor because they were Irish. And when the war broke out, he enlisted and joined the Corps of Engineers. And she is waiting for him to come home, waiting for him to muster out when he is murdered on the streets of Washington, D.C. And something is not sitting right with her about this from the very beginning. But when his ghost shows up, she knows that something is definitely wrong. So she sets out on this quest to solve his murder. And the book kind of follows her journey. There's different things going on behind the scenes. You see her dealing with her grief and some of the other like family dramas that are going on. But it's a very special book to me.
Well, let's dive a little bit deeper into that grief. So you mentioned that she struggles with grief, and we have talked separately, and you did say she also struggles with depression. How has writing this character helped you to process your own grief and depression?
Sophia is very interesting in that she's one of the few characters who just talks in my head. It's like having a separate person living in a little apartment up there, and she just talks to me constantly when I'm working on her books. And when I was writing her, um, I started this book for like NaNoWriMo, I think, or just a little bit before that. And the following February, my grandfather passed away. So as I was working on her book, I was also processing my own grief. And Sophia is not someone who sits there and, oh, what's the word? I'm a professional author. I know the words. She doesn't wallow usually. And she's like, you need to get up. You need to do something about this. If something doesn't sit right with you, then you need to find a way to fix it. So I do have depression, but I was also in a place of situational depression. So I also had outside factors that were influencing it. And she kind of encourages me to, if you've got to make a change, you've got to make a change. You've got to do something about this and do something that is good for your own health and do what feels right to you. But she's a very aggressive persona. Like she doesn't appear that way. She's very ladylike and everything, but she has opinions and you will know them.
Sounds like my kind of leading lady.
Yeah, it's a very fun book. It's a little bit quieter than I think most people are looking for when they say murder mystery, but it's the subtlety that really makes her shine.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what was the most exciting part of writing this book? Was it getting to know this character that now just lives in your head?
Oh, yes, she was wonderful to get to know. And it was also super fun to write because when I lived in Ohio, I recently moved to Seattle. But when I lived in Ohio, I was a historical reenactor. I volunteered for a museum. And this book was actually born out of a Halloween event that we do every year. So it was really awesome to like dress up in her kind of garb and go to the historical 1863 village and sort of put on her mask for a little while. And that's probably one of the reasons why she talks so loud in my head.
That makes sense. Tell me more about this historical reenactments. This sounds like a lot of fun.
It was. I miss it so much. I haven't found any place local where I can do that. But I worked for or volunteered with the Ohio Historical Center. It's in downtown Columbus, and they have a rep- reproduction village. It's based on the early 1800s, and every few years they kind of update it. So when I first started there, they were doing Civil War, and then we worked through the years of the war. And then when I left, we were doing the 1890s. So it's got different decades depending on when you go. And they do events year round, but their main season is just during the summer. But I played, when I left, I was playing a writer and social activist, and I ran the suffrage union.
So you were playing yourself, but back in time.
Pretty much. I mean, go with what you know, right?
Yeah. And did you get to create your own characters then?
You do. They have classes that you take for all of their volunteers, and they teach third person, like not costumed, like just to give you a basis of what the village is and what they do there. And then they do third person costumed, which is this is what they did in the 1890s or in the 1860s. And then they also do first person. And that's, I live in the 1890s. This is how I make my dinner. This is where I go to do my laundry. You know, this is how I live. But it's a really great program and I miss it so much.
That sounds
people are
incredible.
watching.
You would like to start one in Seattle, is what you're telling us.
Oh yeah, I've heard of one, but it's quite a distance away from me. And I believe that it is based around a Native American community, which is just completely outside my wheelhouse. And I would like to learn more about it, but it's not something I can just dive into.
Yeah, it's something, that you would want to participate in as a spectator first, if anything. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, we have a pioneer village here in the far reaches of my city that I never ever go to because it's so far away. It's like it's one of those things that's technically in the same city as me, but like it's a real technicality.
Yeah, I've been to some of those up in Canada and they're really great. My mom is from Quebec, so we went to a bunch of the southern Quebec forts that have the living history there. It's a lot of fun.
Wow, that's awesome. So other than that, I mean, that obviously fed into it. What other research did you do? Historical fiction is so fascinating to me, but also really intimidating.
Yeah. So the hardest part of the research for that is when you research the Civil War, a lot of it is like the battlefront type stuff. And it's the same thing with like World War One, World War Two. And anytime you have those big battles, they're concentrating on things like who the generals were and what the troop movements were. And I'm like, I don't care about that. I want to know what the women were doing on the home front and how they were surviving and how they were coping with all of this. So I was reading a lot of like the women's magazines from the period, and I learned a lot of it through their handcrafts. I'm a knitting designer. I also sew a lot. I make costumes. I'm also into steampunk. So I was looking at what the actual history was, what the history could be, and kind of meeting it in the middle sometimes. But I'm also very particular. Like when I'm writing straight historical fiction, I want straight historical fiction. There's actually a book that I can't really talk about too much, but it's set during I'm sorry, not World War One. It's set in the 1920s. And I spent about 4 days researching what kind of asthma medication this character would have been on. And the one that I wanted to use was not completely right with the time period. Like it was off by like 2 years, I think. So I'm diving into like what other possibilities there could be, what else it should be on. That compound hadn't been discovered yet. This one was already illegal. And Ash, my sister, is just like, you're writing steampunk, change it.
Yes, I love that. But it's also, I find medicine from the 18 and 1900s and really throughout all of history utterly fascinating.
Oh yeah.
When I
Yeah.
was in England, I went to this really cool place that was like this manor that at one point was converted into a hospital during World War One. And they had like a whole hospital ward set up like it would have been that on each different bed had a different ailment and like details on how they would treat that ailment. And some of that stuff is really gruesome and really complicated. And I think if I remember, if I'm remembering correctly, they even had like an inhaler. And it was this like
Yeah.
weird, clunky, huge ceramic thing.
Oh my God. Have you seen it was like a very early insulin pump, I think, and it looks like a jetpack. It was in the
What?
1950s. Yeah, so I have this series on my blog, and it's called "Would This Kill Me in the 1800s?" And I basically look at a lot of the stuff that's very pedestrian today, like autism, diabetes. I've done thyroid disorder, gallstones, that kind of stuff. Things that it's like, oh, you get a diagnosis, you take a pill, or you have some sort of a treatment, and then you're usually better. And looking up, would any of us be alive if we were living in the 1880s, 1890s? And I did research on diabetes, which if you were type 1 diabetic, you probably were dead by the time you were like 14, 15. And
Yeah.
it would not have been pretty. But in the 1950s and 60s, that's when they really started having breakthroughs on this so that people could start living semi-normal lives. If you consider carrying around a giant metal backpack to be normal.
Yeah, well, that's debatable. And, this reminds me of, and your blog series reminds me of, there's a YouTuber I follow, Hannah Witten, and she has this whole apocalypse theory, which is if you're trying to figure out if you're disabled or not, the question is, would you survive the apocalypse? And if not, you're disabled.
I would be so dead.
I'm really on the fence. I feel like I might technically be alive, but it would not be a good time. I think that's a really interesting way of framing things and of framing research too, because if you were to write a post-apocalyptic fiction, chances are you'd probably be going back to a technology level that's sort of similar to like 70, 80, 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Not
unless
earlier.
yeah. Um, and so I think that it's really, oh God, this is just turning into a medical history podcast. Um, I am utterly fascinated. I could go on for days.
Yeah, same here.
Um, did you end up doing any of that kind of research specifically for Off the Rails?
I'm trying to remember. This was like 3 or 4 years ago that I actually did the writing process of it. So I'm trying to remember now. I don't think I did too much medical research for that specifically. I did do a little bit. One of the other characters that she deals with, he is injured at the same attack where her husband is killed, and he is disabled. He has his knee injured and walks with a cane after that. So I was looking at like what kind of injury could he have, and I didn't really want to have him be an amputee because that was a little bit too much of a disability for what I needed him to be able to accomplish. So he still does have his leg, and that's mostly because he tried to choke the doctor when he went to cut it off.
That
like,
is
like it's staying.
That is some great backstory.
And I don't think he ever actually tells her that, but that's actually what happened. That is why he didn't use his leg.
So what I'm seeing here is a prequel novella, and because this guy just sounds amazing.
It might come up in the second book, which is one of the things that I want to write this year. It was originally on my list to write in 2019, but right around the time that Off the Rails came out is when I got my diagnosis. And I'd been pretty ill for several months leading up to that. So I basically took 2019 off to recover because basically I don't remember anything from like July when I started getting ill through about mid-February.
That's
So
horrifying.
yeah, it was pretty bad.
Well, I'm glad to hear that things are better now, and it sounds like you are back to writing. You've got lots of exciting projects in the rings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to narrow it down right now. That's the hard part.
Yeah, I understand that. And it's easy when you're writing series because then you're like, okay, I need to work on the next book in the series. Unless you're working on multiple series at the same time, but I've never figured out how to do that. I don't know how writers do that. That seems completely insane to me.
Well, right now I've got a story I'm working on for my Patreon, which is a contemporary set fantasy. It's basically like a Harry Potter if Harry was a girl.
Nice.
And then I've got my release that comes out in April, which is a 1920s sort of Nancy Drew type of thing. And that's coming out under the regular Sophia Beaumont kind of thing. And then I also need to get to several editing projects, and eventually I need to write Mrs. Andrews' second book so that she'll leave me the hell alone. But I've basically got like this giant apartment complex in my brain. And when you live in an apartment, everybody's always so noisy. You find out so much about your neighbors just by what goes through the walls. Like I know my upstairs neighbor really likes action movies, and they have a toddler, and they were arguing about something at 10 o'clock last night. So you can always hear them like arguing back and forth, like, this is my turn. You need to back off.
Your walls are clearly thinner than mine. That's what I have learned today, that your walls are thinner than mine.
Yeah.
That sucks. But it's really good for eavesdropping, which, is an important way that we as writers can develop better dialogue.
Yeah, I'm having trouble thinking of examples now, but I've definitely worked in dialogue where it's like I overheard something and it came out really random and funny. And I'm like, I need to work that into a book now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to try and reel us back a bit more on to the topic of disability. And I wanted to ask how you feel about the current state of disability representation and how you would like to see disability representation change in the next few years in all media, not just books.
I think that it's gotten a lot better. So I grew up with someone who's disabled. My mom is visually impaired. and she lives out in the middle of nowhere. And I'm her seeing eye daughter, and I'm also um, her GPS system. Basically, she has no sense of direction because she doesn't have any depth perception, basically. And so I'm also her GPS system, which was her global positioning guide. I was leading her around when I was home for Christmas. So I think that when you're in the more urban areas like Toronto, like Seattle, like Columbus, you have access to a lot more. Columbus still kind of sucks for disability stuff. We don't have a lot of sidewalks there. Public transit sucks. People have this idea.
You don't have sidewalks?
No. Like if you're downtown, yeah. If you're in a wealthy neighborhood, yeah. But if you're just in like the suburbs somewhere, nope. Anything that was built after like 1950, I think, they didn't really add sidewalks to it. It's really obnoxious.
That's insane.
Yeah.
I mean, like, we do have areas where there is no sidewalk here, you know, where there's only a sidewalk on one side of the street, but, you know, they're isolated areas. To have that be the norm is really strange to me.
That's how they keep the poor people out of the good neighborhoods.
You're not wrong.
Yeah. So like if you're in an urban area, you do have a lot more access, but having seen what my mom struggled with when I was younger and what she's struggling with right now, they have a service where she can get rides places. It's called Madison Rides. And for her to go 3 miles to the place where she works, it would be $35 each way. So I would like to see more help for people in her situations who are a little bit further out, who don't have the support systems that people in the cities do. And this is something that I've been thinking about since I was 11 or 12. Like, how can we make this happen? And I still don't have an answer for it. But I think that's something that definitely needs to change. And I really do like that we are seeing more disability and mental illness and chronic illness and just general improvement and representation. But we do need to work on the gatekeepers and publishing and work on the agents and the editors and the publishing leads and the marketing people. And it can't all just be cis white people who are in perfect health. It can't work that way because that is not what the majority is. So we need to work on balancing things more and just helping each other out. There was a huge personality shift, I guess, when I moved to Columbus to Seattle, because there's so many more disability rep out here. Like just walking down the street, I'll see somebody in a wheelchair. I'll see somebody with a guide dog or a service animal. I'll see somebody else walking with a visual impairment cane. And you never saw people with disabilities out and about in Columbus. Like it didn't happen because they couldn't get anywhere. They would have to have somebody with a van take them or some other special service. And here it's just like, oh yes, we help these people because it's the right thing to do. And that has been a huge improvement for both my mental and my physical health since I came here. So not to go off on a rant about Columbus and Seattle, but
Well, I'm glad that the move seems to be working out for you, because that would be a hell of a move to go through for it to only backfire.
that was an awful move.
Yeah. But what about in terms of like actual like media? What is there anything specific you would like to see more of, or is it just that attitude that you want to see more of, an attitude that helping disabled people is the right thing to do and see that expressed in media?
I think I just want to see that attitude change of just we're here and have it just be a commonplace thing. Like be watching a TV show and be watching like some cop drama or something, and one of the characters is like, excuse me, I need to check my blood sugar. Or, someone's like, I have to step away for a second to go do this. Or have someone who is visually different in some way. And I'm super excited about, there's a show that I think just started on Hulu, and I'm still waiting to hear what the autistic community is saying about it. And it's Everything's Going to Be Okay. And it's about an autistic main character, a young woman who has just lost her father. I want to see it so bad. It looks hilarious. But I'm kind of waiting to see what the autism community says about it, because with Atypical, there was a lot of backlash because the actor is not autistic. They played to a very specific stereotype. Most of the cast is not on the spectrum. And when the production company was questioned about it, their response was, autistic people don't play autism well.
Was that their actual response?
It wasn't verbatim, but I'm paraphrasing here. And they're just like, yes, this neurotypical actor played the autistic character the best.
That is really frustrating. I've heard a lot of very, very mixed things about that show. And, but I would say generally the opinions from the autistic community have been negative, but I have definitely seen some contrary opinions to that as well. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of mixed feelings there.
Yeah, and a lot of it just comes to your own personal experience and opinion. But I mean, I don't have an autism diagnosis, so I don't want to be supporting something that is damaging to that community. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I think that as consumers of media, it would make such a huge difference if we just all consciously thought that and just had this understanding of, I do not want to do harm and I do not want to support media that does harm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually in a lot of my books, it has come up, I end up having Native American characters. And it's not necessarily something that I set out to do. Sometimes just with the type of story I'm writing, it's what makes sense. And I started asking my readers, what charity do you want to support? And I donate 5% of my profits every year to this charity. And the last 2 years, they voted for the Navajo Water Project, which gives clean water and electricity to some of the most marginalized people in North America. About 40% of them don't have electricity. Most of them don't have access to things like garbage pickup, hospitals. There's very limited law enforcement, and what there is not necessarily there to protect them. So this is something that we do to improve their lives and make things safer and more sanitary for them. But even though I'm trying to get involved and draw attention to that, that's one of the reasons why I don't want to take part in the Native American living history scene with that one museum, just because I don't know enough about that lived experience for it. But I want to lift the voices that do have that experience.
Absolutely. It's such an important thing. And, we may be disabled, but as white people, we do have a certain amount of privilege, and it is our responsibility, in my opinion at least, to use that to lift up people whose voices are trampled over. Mm-hmm. I really dislike the phrasing of the voice for the voiceless. I've come to really find that inherently problematic phrasing because it's assuming that the people don't have a voice, which is just flat out wrong.
Yeah, you don't want to be their voice, you want to be their microphone.
Yeah, exactly. The issue is not that these people lack a voice, it's that these people are not being heard. And the thing that we can do, and I mean, half the reason I have started this podcast is to help people who are not usually being heard be heard.
Mm-hmm. I was lucky. I had a very privileged upbringing. And I can't remember where I found it, but there is like this check your privilege test that you can take online, and it scores you in percentage points and tells you where you are from like cis white male down to, black or brown immigration, like gives you a ranking scale. And when I was younger, I started out up here because my dad was in the fire service. We were a middle class family. We had a pretty nice house. And as I've gotten older, I've spent my entire adult life in poverty. I've struggled with mental illness. I've, been diagnosed with chronic illness. So I've just kind of slid slowly down this scale, and it is not fun to slide. It's like the worst playground slide ever.
Yeah, that's an all too common experience in today's messy world of late stage capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
But, we can be out there supporting each other and pushing for things to be better. And maybe it won't work, but at least we're doing something with all of this anxious energy we have, right?
Mm-hmm. We can at least try. It keeps us from going completely insane.
Yes.
I'm already like,
yeah,
there. But
the emphasis is on the word completely. I mean, we are both writers, so that's already
I've already mentioned the apartment building in my head and the random people who talk to me. So
yeah. All right. Well, this has been an amazing conversation, and I think we should wrap up now. We are getting to that time. So, where can people find out more about you and your work?
Okay. Probably the best place is my website / blog, which is notmagicknitter.wordpress.com.
And that is not with a K, and
yeah,
K-N-O-T.
magic with a K.
Magic with a K at the end. Yes.
Yeah. So there's a lot of K's
listeners.
And then you can also find me as Not Magic on Twitter. I tweet a lot of random opinions, funny stuff, cat pictures. There's a lot of cat pictures. If you're not so comfortable with swearing, then check out my Instagram instead. It's also Not Magic. That's mostly cat pictures. Let's be real, that's all any of us use Instagram for. It's cat pictures.
Yeah, I do. I have, because I hate Goodreads. So I have started actually using Instagram as a place to sort of record the books that I read. But really, I can only read so fast. I can take so many pictures of my cats. And other people take pictures of my cats and send them to me, and then I post them because, they're cats.
Yeah, I did that Dolly Parton challenge last night for my cat because I'm like, there is no way I'm posting pictures of myself on there. Also, I don't have Facebook or Tinder, so why?
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for this lovely conversation. It has been a delight to have you. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and good luck with all of your upcoming projects.
Thank you. It was great to see you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Spoonie Authors Podcast. The Spoonie Authors Podcast is part of the Spoonie Authors Network, a community initiative devoted to sharing the stories of disabled authors and educating abled people about what life is like for disabled creatives. Transcripts of this podcast are also available on the Spoonie Authors Network. To learn more or become a contributor, visit spoonieauthorsnetwork.blog. And of course, if you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast streaming platform.